he's going to present to us just an articulation of the economic analysis that was in the SMEC feasibility study for Hell's Gates, and looking at both from the point of view of whether farmers are going to make money or whether that money spent on building the dam would be good use of public funds, or effective use of public funds. Thanks very much.
Thanks, John.
You're welcome.
I think, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yes, I'm what you might call a specialist generalist with a background in agricultural science, agricultural economics, agricultural extension, and anything else you'd like to name. Unfortunately, I was supposed to be fishing in the Gulf this weekend, but that got cancelled on Thursday, so I'm here for your to make you feel sorry for yourselves. Basically, John sent me the report, chapter 3 of the report, and asked me to read it and think about whether I'd be wanting to invest in it. So I'm not an expert in the report. I've just had a quick read of it, looked at some of the key tables, and made what I think are some of the conclusions. And basically, there are a number of justifications, but a lot of it centres around the irrigated agriculture from 30 to 35,000 hectares. So the first question was, would farmers make a profit and invest in the land? Now, if you just look at I think it's table 14, the gross margin of annual crops, without water costs, and of course gross margins don't include the capital costs, right? And those are the gross margins per hectare. The 1s and 3s refer to the different soil types. Soil type 1 is the better quality soil, where you can basically grow anything all the time. Soil type 3 is a poorer quality soil, where it's not trafficable, and you can only grow certain sorts of crops on it. And those are the gross margins, basically per hectare, and it shows capsicum and chilli. And then if you put across that the cost of water plus the amount of water that they estimate in their thing, and then you think about, can they afford to pay for the price of water? And this is medium priority water, which is about $600 a megalitre. You see that only the top 3 crops are profitable on a gross margin basis only, not necessarily if you take into account all the capital costs of running those crops. And the rest of them require a subsidy for them to be profitable. If you look at the perennial crops, they also do gross margins. There's a problem with gross margins. It's really an annual margin. Gross margins are really only suitable for annual crops, and the gross margin that's included there is the maximum gross margin that occurs, in their estimation, in year 8, and for avocados, year 10 for lemons, year 11 for oranges. Now, I'm not an expert in avocados, but I know most crops get to a peak and then they go down over time, so you have to replace them. So what this is saying is that we have those sort of gross margins, but if you add the water cost, well, avocados is sort of profitable at the maximum gross margin, okay? And lemons are less so. So they require a higher priority water, which is more expensive, about $1,000 a megalitre. Now, the other thing they have up there in their report is whole farm profitability, and I've just focused on the net present value. Basically, what we're saying there, the net present value is using discounting, and this is over 20 years at 7%. Now, if I was a farmer, I wouldn't want to be investing in a risky investment if my return was only 7%. Governments may invest at 7%, but no sensible farmer that I know wants to undertake a risky investment at 7%. But anyway, leaving that aside, if you have $1,000 now, at 7% in 20 years, it's worth about $3,900. And similarly, if you have $1,000 in 20 years, currently it's around $260. So that's what this is doing, basically discounting back. Now, what that shows is that without a subsidy, only capsicum and chilli are economic. Okay, and that's for that's a 200 hectare farm. For type 3 crops, it's a 300 hectare farm because they're more broad acre. And even with a full subsidy, basically at 7%, only capsicum and chilli are economic. If you look at the perennial crops, with no subsidy, only avocados are economic. And that's on a 200 hectare farm. Obviously they have higher priority water and higher cost water for those crops. Even with a full subsidy, you know, lemons may be, but they're not necessarily. So the implications, basically, if you look at it, there's only 2 crops that look to be profitable at the price of water that's in that report that you'd really want to hang your hat on. And do we want to have 30 and 50,000 hectares of those crops? Just to give you an idea, the North Queensland current avocados is around 1,400 hectares. So even if we only had 2,000 hectares of avocados, that would more than double the current production in North Queensland. So you can imagine, and we don't export many avocados, and there's no real export market for it, and they would, up at that area, they're probably, I come from the Atherton Tableland, they'd be pretty well competing directly with farmers in the Atherton Tableland at the time of year. So the price, I just can't imagine to think about what would happen to the price, even if somebody wanted to invest in it. So, you know, what the report says is essentially that large subsidies are required for the profitability of crops, which means an ongoing burden for taxpayers. But why should those farmers get the subsidies and not farmers from somewhere else? Why shouldn't the Burdekin farmers get some sort of subsidy for water efficiency? Why shouldn't the Atherton Tableland growers get some subsidy to improve efficiency or to do something else? We need to think about the alternative investments. It would also depress prices for a whole range of crops, because also chilies and capsicums are basically grown in Queensland, so it's the same implication for them in Bowen and Bundaberg and other places. The other issue is, I'm old enough to remember, and I saw the Ord River scheme in 1974 when I was travelling around Australia after I finished university, and there was, even then, that scheme was not growing enough crops, and they're still struggling. In fact, some of my ex-students from Curtin University are now up there growing, and they're trying to find crops to make money out of. So what we're really worried about, or I would be worried about, is the low profitability would mean uncultivated land, which then raises the costs of water per unit. And so who would want to invest in it? Does it give a return to public funds? Basically, they did a net present value, as I said before, at a 7% discount rate with the mixed cropping scenarios, without any subsidies, doesn't make any money. With perennial crops, it does sort of make some money with no subsidy, but not much. And this is the 5 billion or whatever, you know, just mind-blowing amounts of money being invested, and it's making sweet Fanny Adams in money out of it. So, as they say on page 29, it is unlikely that a return on capital would be recovered by the scheme operator. I think that is an understatement. The other thing they do is a Monte Carlo simulation. Basically, you know, I saw on the figure that the rainfall here is 1,000 millimetres. So most of the assumptions in this model are built on an average or most likely thing, right? But you can look at the simulation. All Monte Carlo does is draw balls out of a hat sort of thing based on the probability of something occurring. So in the mixed cropping scenario, they did 5,000 simulations changing some of the key variables. In none of those did the model make a profit. Not one, okay? Not with the best assumptions. In the perennial cropping scenario, less than 1/3 of the simulations gave a positive NPV. So, and there was a 50% probability of an NPV be minus 2.9 billion plus 293 million. To me, that's a very risky investment for anybody. If the government's got some money, I think there are lots of better places they can put it. So there are other estimates of the land, you know, the market situation, and the report does this very well. It's all in there if you want to read it. The entry to export market's difficult. Currently, avocado exports only 3.7% of production. It would complete. I come from the outfitted table, so a lot of the people I play golf with are avocado farmers. So I don't think they'd be too pleased if the government was subsidising somebody else and they have to pump the water out themselves, because a lot of these are around Atherton are actually pumping it out of groundwater. They wouldn't particularly want somebody else getting a subsidy to grow their things. I don't think. I haven't discussed it with them. But indirect impacts have not been included. So, some implications: high water costs. There's no consideration of the huge opportunity cost for the $5.4 billion or whatever it is. It's, in my mind, a bottomless pit. You could just continue pouring money into it, or it could become a stranded asset. You know, a white elephant. That's what I'd be seriously concerned about. Thank you.